Hi, I'm Michael Popa, Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition, and welcome to Chaos Ledge Quick Take Wrap Up, an insider's look into what happened this year in the Kansas legislature. Today, we'll hear from Kansas State Rep. Brett Parker, District 29. Representative Parker, give us your quick take.
I think the number one takeaway for me is yet another year has gone by without Kansas expanding Medicaid. We're in a smaller and smaller minority of states that haven't adopted this really common sense policy. And it was especially painful this year because the federal government, through new legislation, had incentivized expanding Medicaid, and we turned down an extra $450 million to our state on top of all the other money from expansion over the next 2 years. So that remains to be just a glaring missing piece. The last states to expand are Oklahoma, Missouri, Utah, Nebraska, Idaho. We are talking about pretty deeply conservative states who have found the will to get this done. And it's disappointing that we haven't yet in Kansas. That's not to say there weren't other good things. Didn't happen this session, but to me, that's the number one takeaway. Other disappointment was the Republican supermajority advancing some voter restriction laws to make it more difficult to turn in advance ballots or help your neighbors turn in advance ballots, essentially. Is really disappointing. This is legislation that basically had no one from the public testifying in support of. We saw different versions of this that Mainstream Coalition and a number of community partners came out against. And really, it seemed like the only proponents were just Republican members of the legislature who were pushing this policy. And then at the end, unfortunately, Kansans for Life started pushing voter restrictions, I think out of fear that if everyone in Kansas should vote next August on the constitutional amendment, they would lose. They've seen the polling on the issue. So that was another setback for sure. Really appreciate the governor stepping up to veto that legislation. And it was really hard to see the handful of Republicans who had originally voted no flipping once Kansans for Life started pressuring them and ultimately passing some new voter restrictions in Kansas. As a teacher who ran for the legislature several years ago to fund schools, the number one win is that we came out of a tough legislative session with constitutionally adequate school funding. We are still meeting the requirements of the Supreme Court ruling from a few years ago. That looked precarious for a bit, but thankfully the Senate blocked a really, really bad piece of legislation that would have taken a lot of money out of public schools. And once we came back in May for veto session, thankfully the governor, along with a number of important senators and some help from the House, came together on a pretty solid compromise. And in our darker times of this session, I think it was more than we would have hoped for. So we were really glad to see that in the end. Another great win from this session is we took a big leap forward in mental health services in Kansas in the days ahead. We passed legislation to let some of our community mental health centers become federally certified community behavioral health centers. Sorry, I always mix up the acronyms, then I have to think through it closely. But what that means is that they're able to provide moving forward a lot more comprehensive services and draw down some federal funds to make sure that they can do the hiring that they need to do that. And it's probably the biggest thing that the legislature has done to support mental health. Again, passing Medicaid expansion would be another great step towards that, but nonetheless, it was a big win for mental health services in Kansas as well. One thing to be watching moving forward is the budget for the state, and I know that's not always the most exciting policy. We kind of got bailed out at the end of this session with some rosier financial outlooks and revenue estimates. So our budget looks okay at the end of this year. It looks okay at the end of next year. But if you look closely, you can see that Kansas is spending more than we're taking in, and that's going to result in some hard decisions down the road unless we really rein that in. One of the challenges with that is that the supermajority in the legislature overrode the governor's veto of another tax plan, not to the scale of the Brownback experiment that we saw before, but it's still hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue forward when we really need it. So hopefully revenues keep coming in better than expected moving forward, but it's pretty dangerous for the legislature to keep banking on that. And the governor has done a lot of work trying to hold the line and make sure that we have the appropriate ending balances and are set up for success down the road. Unfortunately, the legislature is not always cooperative in that goal. We're, essentially out of session now. The best way to get in touch with me is still my legislative email. It's brett.parker@house.ks.gov. So that's Brett with 2 T's .parker@house.ks.gov. That's the quickest way to get a response. It pops up on my phone. I'm trying to reply to emails just basically as soon as they come in on a variety of issues, and then happy to connect further after that. But that's the quickest way to get a hold of me.
Thank you, Representative Parker, for being with us today, and thanks to everyone for watching. If you'd like to get more involved in Kansas politics, please visit mainstreamcoalition.org, and please follow us on social media to make sure that you catch our next Quick Take. Thank you for supporting Mainstream's work and for your commitment to do more than vote.